Coming up on Network Africa, Ethiopia and Somalia agree to end a bitter dispute over Somaliland port. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa hosts Angola President João Lourenço to boost trade relations. Plus, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls on G20 to address financial injustices facing developing countries. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. Ethiopia and Somalia have agreed to end their feud over Addis Ababa's plans to build a port in the breakaway region of Somaliland following talks in Turkey. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan played mediator and has welcomed this historic agreement, which he said would eventually ensure landlocked Ethiopia's access to the sea. At the press conference, he held hands with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, who both agreed to respect one another's sovereignty. The two neighbors have been at loggerheads since January this year, when Ethiopia signed a maritime deal with Somaliland, which Somalia considers as part of its territory. It prompted fears of a wider regional conflict as Egypt has been backing Somalia, and that's largely due to its anger with Ethiopia for building a dam on the River Nile.
And we have common and mutual opportunities to develop together in our own interests. Somalia will contribute towards that, and we are ready to work with the Ethiopian leadership and the Ethiopian people to benefit the opportunities that we had in all aspects.
Recep Erdogan, his government, and the people of Turkey. Allow me to assert here again that Ethiopia's aspiration for secure and reliable access to the sea is a peaceful venture and one that would benefit all our neighbors. With the growing youth population, the demands for our economy warrants such access to peace efforts in the Horn of Africa. President Erdogan has taken. I believe that today's constructive discussions will push us into a new year with this spirit of cooperation, friendship, and the willingness to work together instead of against each other.
In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has hosted his Angolan counterpart, João Lourenço, at the Union Buildings in Pretoria ahead of a business forum aimed at increasing bilateral trade and investment. The South Africa-Angola Business Forum, organized by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, is expected to bring attendees from development financing institutions, business leaders, and also senior government officials. The forum will be addressing ways to boost trade and investment between the two Southern African economies, and events will discuss potential cooperation in sectors such as agriculture, energy, healthcare, mining, and oil and gas. In the meantime, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says the G20 must address the financial injustices facing developing nations, including unmanageable debt, unfair tax systems, and insufficient access to financial resources. Mr. Guterres adds that by enhancing multilateral banks, the G20 can provide better support and financial infrastructure to help countries navigate these obstacles, ensuring a more balanced global economic system. He made these remarks at the Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting that held in Sandton, Johannesburg. Our correspondent Innocent Samosa has more.
A call to address the global financial injustices. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says improving the debt crisis and creating a fairer, more equitable tax system would help reduce inequalities between nations, ensuring that developing countries can thrive without being burdened by unfair financial practices.
First, the G20 must lead on delivering financial justice. As you know well, financing is fundamental. From inclusive economic growth to supporting industrialization and food security, or addressing inequalities. The Pact for the Future includes commitments that provide a roadmap to reform global financial institutions. These institutions must represent today's economy, not the world of decades past. And developing countries must be represented fairly in their governance. These institutions must also protect economies, particularly vulnerable ones, from global shocks.
He highlighted several key issues, including unmanaged debt, unfair tax systems, and insufficient access to financial resources, all of which hinder the growth and sustainability of developing countries. South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana stated that the country will accelerate financial reforms by launching the G20 expert panel.
It is within this spirit that South Africa has also proposed a stocktake of the G20 finance track to ensure that the G20 remains agile, responsive, and fit for purpose. G20 leaders stated at the Rio Summit last month that they will accelerate the reform of the international financial architecture so that it can meet the urgent challenges of sustainable development, climate change, and efforts to eradicate poverty.
The minister emphasized that while the challenges ahead are significant, there is a strong commitment from the G20 to address them. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General's courtesy call on President Cyril Ramaphosa and a meeting with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Ronald Lamola, takes place in the context of the UN leaders' mission to Southern Africa, which is centered on his attendance of the bicentennial celebrations in Lesotho on Thursday. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
A recently launched report of the State of Instant and Inclusive Payment System, SIIPS, report in Africa is highlighting the extraordinary growth of instant payment systems, IPS, across the continent and exploring the impact of this on financial inclusion. As Africa continues its digital transformation, there are 31 live IPS in 26 countries and another 27 nations preparing to launch their own systems. The report paints a picture of a rapidly evolving financial ecosystem that holds immense promise for Africa's underserved communities. The report was launched in November in Accra, Ghana, in partnership with Africa NENDA, the World Bank, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Well, the Deputy CEO at Africa NENDA, Akinwale Goodluck, joins us now in the studio for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
It's an absolute pleasure, Laya.
Well, let's begin with the difference between last year's report and this year's report on SIIPS. How has the instant payment system, the landscape in Africa evolved since last year's report?
I think we're seeing significant and considerable progress. We're seeing that there's a greater understanding of the difference between instant payment systems and inclusive instant payment systems. Africa is trending in the right direction. We're seeing more and more payment systems across the continent begin to introduce a lot more inclusivity features. So it's helping to deepen financial inclusion around the continent. We have seen new IPSs come on board. We have seen about 3 of them declassified for not meeting certain conditions, like perhaps they're not operating 24/7, or they have other issues that cannot help them to be regarded as full and inclusive IPS. So we're headed in the right direction. There's a lot of work going on at the regional level. A lot of countries are also coming together. So we're seeing TISIP doing quite well. PAPS is also on board. We're seeing GMAC supporting and servicing Central Africa. And hopefully next year we will be able to add BCIO, the WEMU interbank payment system too.
Well, just very quickly, for the benefit of those who are not really familiar with what SIIPS is, just give us a brief on that.
All right, perhaps I can start with, first of all, Africa Nenda is a financial inclusion accelerator. It is wholly funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what keeps us awake at night is just how can we deploy payment systems that serve the bottom of the pyramid, that serve vulnerable people in Africa, that serve women, that serve our young people. Today, there's still about 400 million people who are excluded in Africa from digital payments, and digital payments are a key ingredient for economic and social inclusion. So in terms of the differences, I would say that we've seen a lot of progress. Things are happening really, really quickly. We're seeing a lot of central banks, national switches really coming on board. We are seeing a big growth in transaction volumes. If I look at 2023 for Africa, we had about 49 billion transactions, equal to about $1 trillion US. So that's a significant improvement in terms of value and in terms of volume.
Well, hinging on your comment about progress, the report, highlights progress, but then it mentions that no instant payment system in Africa has really fully achieved inclusivity. So what are the barriers to this and how can it be overcome?
Well, I think the payment systems in Africa have done very, very well. Perhaps they could also do a better job in terms of telling their own story. We've seen in the payment system, in the payments world, where people who have just come on board are telling their story better and making it look like Africa is playing catch up. Meanwhile, Africa has had instant and inclusive payment systems for quite a few years. We said that none in Africa has achieved full maturity. And the main primary driver for that is usually around, the biggest concern will be access for user recourse, is mechanisms for users, is for able to like if there's been a mistake, if there's been fraud, how are they being supported? How long do they have to wait to get their money back? What kind of protection is made for them around digital literacy, financial literacy, from fraud, etc. But if I look at the landscape in Africa today, quite a few are headed towards that mature stage. NIPS, the Nigerian Interbank Payment System, is one of the most advanced, if not the most advanced, on the continent. It meets all the criteria except for the criteria around recourse for customers. I think Gibbs in Ghana is also looking and trending well. We expect to see more and more payment systems across the region also headed from basic to progress and ultimately to mature.
All right, you mentioned central banks, earlier, and regulators. What role do they need to play in this, in fostering a seamless trans-border transaction that we can see between countries in Africa? Well,
look, cross-border payments are fundamental, and I think that Africa is taking a very holistic approach to it in terms of, one, encouraging regional economic communities, encouraging financial common currencies across the regions. We're seeing that participation of central banks, national switches in the governance of the instant and inclusive payment system is a key fundamental requirement to grow across the inclusivity spectrum. Central banks have a lot of work to do, working with other organs of government in terms of regionalization, in terms of policy harmonization, in terms of helping to set up the structures and the dependencies for cross-border trade, so customs, policy alignment, and all the other things that help to drive regional trade.
All right, final question to you will be, which countries have we seen that are currently leading, in adopting inclusive payment systems, and are there lessons from their success to, other countries that are yet to reach that level?
Well, we have seen countries like Brazil do quite well with PIX in terms of volume, in terms of players, and, it's done very, very well. But in Africa, I think Ghana is doing quite well. Nigeria is doing very well too. We've seen PaySharp launch in South Africa. We've seen, what M-Pesa is doing in Kenya. So there's a lot of progress across several markets on the continent.
All right, then we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Deputy CEO at Africa Nenda, Akinwale. Good luck. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Layo.
We'll take a break now on Network Africa, still to come. The Confederation of African Football congratulates Morocco in joining Spain and Portugal to co-host the 2030 Men's Soccer World Cup. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. The ECOWAS Mediation and Security Council at the ministerial level has called for cooperation and collective action to tackle money laundering and terrorism financing to combat security challenges in the West African region. The council made the call at the opening of its 53rd ordinary session held in Abuja, where it says the ECOWAS standby force will soon be operationalized. Our correspondent, Emperor Simon, reports.
Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Defense from the Economic Community of West Africa, ECOWAS, are meeting in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, for the 53rd ordinary session of the Mediation and Security Council at the ministerial level. Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tugar, chairs the meeting, which focuses on addressing the political situation, security challenges, and humanitarian problems in the ECOWAS region.
As the ECOWAS Regional Action Plan on the fight against terrorism concludes this year, this meeting offers a critical opportunity to chart a forward-looking strategy to bolster our collective security architecture and sustain the momentum in addressing these threats. Furthermore, our efforts to operationalize the ECOWAS standby force are advancing steadily. We have already received cost implications for its activation, and at this session, we anticipate updates from the ECOWAS Commission on the modalities for mobilizing the required resources to make this initiative a reality.
The president of the ECOWAS Commission, Omar Torre, shares the same views as he urges members to recommit to the values of ECOWAS.
It is time to tighten the loose ends to protect our people, our institutions, and our way of life, and strengthen trust and confidence of our people in state and regional institutions. Excellencies, your deliberations in this session will broadly be about these issues.
The United Nations pledges support for ECOWAS.
UNOWAS will continue to support national and regional efforts to ensure peace and stability, enhance democracy and good governance, including through inclusive political processes and socio-economic developments, with a special emphasis on economic empowerment of women and youth.
The ECOWAS Mediation and Security Council lauds the achievements recorded in the area of maritime security within the ECOWAS maritime domain and hopes to sustain the tempo. Emperor Simon, Channels Television News.
The UN Special Representative in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Bintu Keita, reports of political tensions around calls to revise the constitution and the insecurity in North Kivu and Ituri, especially related to the activity of rebel forces. She was addressing the UN Security Council, speaking of the M23 being a non-signatory of the ceasefire agreement that has consolidated its civilian and military occupation in North Kivu.
The voting period was marked by political tensions around calls to revise the constitution and the continued and escalating insecurity in North Kivu and Ituri, especially related to the activity of ADF, M23, Codeco, and Zaire. The prevailing security environment continues to alarmingly exacerbate the humanitarian situation, further intensified by ever-growing climate change challenges. According to OCHA, almost 6.4 million people, 4 million people, are currently displaced due to armed conflicts and natural hazards. Multiple epidemics have also aggravated the humanitarian situation.
Framing this as intra-African hostility diminishes the complexity of the conflict and the roles of various actors involved. This is not a DRC-Rwanda issue, but a multifaceted crisis that demands nuanced understanding and coordinated action from the international community.
A tripartite summit is scheduled to take place in Luanda on 15 December, as mentioned by some members of the Council. under the auspices of the President Lorenzo, for further steps toward accelerating stabilization efforts for peace in the Eastern DRC. This summit represents the culmination of a series of mediation initiatives to achieve peace, stability, and economic development in the region.
As the campaign marking the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence ends, wife of the Lagos State Governor, Dr. Ibijoke Sanwo-Olu, paid a special visit to Wesley School for the Hearing Impaired in Surulere, where she engaged the pupils and emphasized the importance of safeguarding children against all forms of abuse. During her interaction with the pupils, Dr. Sanwo-Olu underscored the inclusive governance philosophy of the administration of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, which prioritizes the protection of vulnerable children, including people living with disability.
Wife of the Lagos State Governor, Dr. Ibijoke Sanwo-Olu, visits Wesley School for the Hearing Impaired at Surulere area of the state to educate the pupils and the teachers about gender-based violence. Putting an end to gender-based violence in Lagos State is an important task for the Office of the First Lady. For this reason, the campaign has been brought to the learning environment of children with hearing impairment to ensure that no one takes advantage of them because of their situation.
We have also mentioned the fact that you can report. Because if you have school counselors, which I'm sure they have in this place, you have teachers who are trustworthy that you can report to do that person a favor by reporting.
The principal of Wesley School highlights the school's commitment to providing free quality education and vocational training for children at the nursery, primary, and secondary school levels.
In the whole Nigeria, Lagos State is #1 when you are talking of special education. This is beyond politics. Because as of today, we have 5 solid, good special schools.
The Surulere Local Government Authority assures of strengthening policies that will protect children and vulnerable groups across the council and beyond.
And I really appreciate all the teachers for taking good care of these children.
Dr. Ibijoke Sanwo-Olu says the state government has zero tolerance for all forms of abuse. She also stressed the importance of being observant of children's sexual behaviors and reactions, which is a potential indicator of abuse or distress.
It is important that you know these different people that you can report to. One thing I want to mention is monitoring. Monitoring has to increase in all communities. In the schools, there has to be monitors. People watching out. In the homes, there has to be monitors. We're in Surulere local government. I'm sure the chairman has his own structure that he has put in place with the suburb arm in Surulere, with the MOH in Surulere. So it's a team. All the arms of the ministries are actually in the local government. And that is what this is all about. I want to ask questions now before I round up. What is the theme for this year?
The advocacy talk was rounded off with the signing of a dedicated pledge board by the pupils and dignitaries, symbolizing their collective resolve to continue advocating for an end to sexual and gender-based violence.
And finally, the Confederation of African Football, CAF President Patrice Motsepe, is congratulating Morocco as the country was named as a co-host of the 2030 Men's Soccer World Cup on Wednesday, joining Spain and Portugal to host the 48-team tournament. FIFA President Gianni Infantino made the announcement following a virtual extraordinary congress and also announced that Saudi Arabia will host the 2034 World Cup. South Africa hosted the World Cup in 2010, becoming the first country in CAF, the Confederation of African Football, to host the event.
Great honor, but it's also a historic day for Africa, and that's why we are very happy and very excited that Morocco will be hosting the FIFA World Cup 2030, it's something that we are very proud of. And on behalf of the 54 member associations that are part of CAF, we would like to express our deep gratitude to King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, the people of Morocco, the government of Morocco.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.